Greetings and welcome to ValoU. I'm Zaladrith and I'll be your instructor for today. Today's class is Mental 390, Conditioning. In psychology, classical conditioning is an associative learning method where a neutral stimulus is associated with a positive or negative stimulus, resulting in a conditioned behavioral response to the neutral stimulus alone. Pavlov's dogs salivating to the sound of a tone is the typical example. If attackers always 5-rush a site, for instance, defenders quickly associate the sound of many footsteps with the site hit to start defending the site earlier. The neutral stimulus is footsteps, the negative stimulus is the site getting hit, and the behavioral response might be to start smoking main, tossing mollies, and fast rotating. This negative stimulus of getting run over on a rush isn't new, it's happened to most players many times. Therefore, your opponents coming to the game have already experienced a lot of prior conditioning. In higher ranks, you can think of the culmination of prior conditioning as the meta, how people expect the game to be played based on the prior learning of the community. Expanding on our previous example, we can use strategy to abuse the defender's conditioned response. Perhaps you send 3 to 4 people to make the sounds of multiple sets of footsteps, flash and fight A main, and then grab orb, but end up rotating and actually hitting B. The defender's conditioned response might be to waste offensive util and over-rotate, letting you hit their weak side for a few rounds. After being punished a few times, the defenders figure something out. Waste less util, they don't rotate as much. This might be the result of stimulus discrimination, the ability to recognize differences in similar neutral stimuli and figure out the criteria that associates it with the conditioned positive or negative stimulus. Your planned stimulus was you hear footsteps, but enemies might realize they only hit the site when they also use Sova Dart and smokes. They've essentially figured out your tells, and will only exhibit the conditioned response of rotating when the right noise is made. Now, at this point, intentionally or not, you've also untrained their prior conditioning of over-defending by exposing them to footsteps but not hitting site. In psychology, repeatedly exposing a neutral stimulus without the originally associated negative stimulus to untrain a conditioned response is called extinction. Now that they've been untrained and are more likely to ignore footsteps, you can abuse this lack of conditioned response by rushing site again, which will also once again reinforce their response. Now, there's obviously more strategies than just rush or fake rush. Let's say we instead shift walk through one of the mains and contact explode instead, and we do this for several rounds in a row. After this rest period without a multi-footstep rush, if we fake the footsteps again, defenders are more likely to exhibit the original conditioned response that we thought was extinct. This psychology concept is called spontaneous recovery, where an extinct conditioned response resurges in a weakened form after a period of rest. This period is critical as it gives time for your opponents to remember their original prior conditioning of overreacting to the rush. I also want to briefly discuss operant conditioning, which is a type of associative learning where a voluntary behavior is rewarded or punished to encourage or discourage it. Most of the time, rewarding your enemy is not a good idea, so the tricky part is that you usually have to be present in order to punish a behavior and discourage it. For instance, if there's an annoying lurker on the enemy team, punishing them by shooting them in the back will usually be enough to discourage them from trying again for at least a few rounds. Not only do you have to be there though, but you have to successfully win your fight to truly punish them. Now, Sentinel utility helps greatly with that aspect. For instance, encountering a Cypher trip and being forced to break it feels bad when you're trying to flank, discouraging future flanks so they just become too much effort and risk for a decreased value. In this actual example of operant conditioning, I was playing an unrated game and lurking outside B main in this strong lurk angle. One of the rounds, I punished Jet by shooting her in the back, attempting operant conditioning to train her not to push. The next round, I switched on my position to watch from tiles, expecting her conditioning to result either in not flanking or attempting to clear my original spot, and I was rewarded with shooting her in the back again. At this point, I thought it increasingly unlikely that she'd flank, but it was unrated, and I had been conditioned and rewarded so much that I switched to a third location, watching from an off angle at spawn that could punish her checking tiles, but she didn't show up. At this point, I realized she'd been successfully conditioned to stop flanking due to punishment, so I stopped lurking for a few rounds and played with team. I then predicted that after seeing me group up for a few rounds that her previous conditioning would be extinct, so I bought an operator and started the round on top of Ticket Booth, killing her a third time to close out the half, and making me chuckle to myself. Now remember that all of this associative learning is just training enemies to act in a more predictable way. If neither team thinks about conditioning or prediction, the game devolves into attackers rushing a site and defenders rotating and fighting until one team wins. As teams try to condition, predict, and counter each other, strategies evolve and grow, changing from round to round, and now we're really playing Valorant instead of just a shooter game. In summary, classical conditioning is a type of associative learning where a neutral stimulus is associated with a positive or negative stimulus, resulting in a conditioned response to the neutral stimulus alone. There's a lot of prior conditioning that every player will come into the game with. You can abuse conditioning by choosing strategies that counter a predictable conditioned response. Enemies can use stimulus discrimination to figure out your tells. You can use extinction to decrease a conditioned response, opening up weaknesses. You can use a rest period to trigger spontaneous recovery, increasing the likelihood of an extinct conditioned response. You can think about operant conditioning to punish enemies for taking actions you want to prevent, especially with Sentinel utility. And, even with great conditioning making enemies more predictable, You still need to actually predict their learning and strategize around that prediction. That's all for today's lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the lecturer or the TAs in the comments below. Thanks for attending. We hope you enjoy your stay here at ValoU.